Hi again. Welcome to Lesson 9, which is on maps questions in writing task 1 in the academic module of the IELTS exam. So the next two lessons, maps and processes or diagrams, are fairly similar to each other. Some people would categorize them as the same type of question. I think they're a bit different, so I'm going to have two separate lessons on them. But what's common about these types of questions is essentially you're just describing the information that you see, all of it, in terms of differences between two different maps, so describing all of the changes between map 1 and map 2, or for processes or diagrams questions, describing all of the stages in whatever process the question is about. Using the passive is also something that these two question types have in common. So the way that you describe the changes or the stages, the passive is in most cases is a substantial part of the description that you do, simply because that's the way that we do that for conveying this type of information in English, where we're focused on what the change is or what's happening, not who's doing the action or who made the change. So if you think about maps specifically, you've got to know vocabulary related to things you find on maps. So buildings, roads, other types of structures, parks, describing land, locations in terms of compass points, north, south, east, west. Those are important for maps questions, and you'll generally need them for any maps question that you do. Otherwise, for grammar, thinking about which verb tenses you use. All the maps questions I've seen and are in the Cambridge books and in the official materials are either a map in the present day and a map in the past. So the changes you'll be talking about will be using the past tense. So buildings were added. Or they're a map in the present day and a map in the future. So the changes you will be talking about will be how you refer to the future. So a structure is planned to be built, will be built, etc. There's a little bit of confusion. If you look, I can't remember which, I think it's maybe either Cambridge 5 or Cambridge 6, books which are still relevant for the current version of the exam, 5 through 14. There is a maps question where you just have one map and you have to discuss two different locations on the map, and I think it's like which location is more appropriate for a supermarket or something. They're considering building the supermarket in this town, and there's two locations, and you have to describe where the locations are and talk about which one is more appropriate. I was an examiner from 2012 to 2018, roughly, and I never saw a question like this. I've talked to lots of examiners about this. Nobody else has ever seen a question like this. So, and if you think about what you're supposed to do in task 1, you're supposed to describe information. You are not supposed to interpret. You are not supposed to give your opinion. You're not supposed to evaluate. Simply, you are to describe the information that you see. So this function of say which location is best for the supermarket is not really appropriate for task 1. And because this single map type of question, there's only one appearance of it in the Cambridge books from a very long time ago, like around 15 years ago, and nobody seems to have seen this question type since. My assumption is that they no longer ask this type of maps question. So all maps questions, according to all the information I have and all the research I've done and my own experience, are based on at least two maps or multiple maps where what you're describing is the changes to the map. You're not giving commentary about which location is better or something like this. So remember that. So if you do see that question, my advice would be just to ignore it. And I think we can safely assume that that question type no longer exists. Similar to the other types of task 1 questions, there are 3 aspects that we need to write about. We need to introduce the question, say what the maps are showing us. We need to have an overview of the changes to the map. So again, that's a bit different than in Graph's question, but we still need an overview. And we need to have details paragraph to talk about the changes. The structure generally also fits in terms of one paragraph to introduce what the maps show, another one to give the overview, and 2 more to give the details. We're going to look at a maps question and just think about those things, and then look at a specific example of a full report to a maps question. So if we look at the title, the 2 maps below show an island before and after the construction of some tourist facilities. And then we have a closer look. 2 islands before and after some tourist facilities were built. So in the past, right? So before, after, that's what it says very clearly there. Before and after. And so as far as your overview goes, it's usually a good idea to say what kind of place it was and what kind of place it has become, or what kind of place it is and what kind of place it will become. So if we look at this, what was it before? It was simply an island. There was a beach, some sea, some palm trees. Like, there are no people. It's uninhabited. So afterwards, obviously, there are lots and lots of tourist facilities. So our overview is going to focus on that previously it was an uninhabited island, and now it's a place for tourists. So something like this. Overall, the area has been transformed from an uninhabited island to a place with a variety of attractions and facilities for tourists. Something like that gives us a basic idea of, like, it was like this and now it's like this. That's essentially what your overview is in a maps question. So it's not talking about trends, it's not talking about stages, it's talking about the type of place it was and the type of place it is, or with a future component map, the type of place it is and the type of place it will be in the future. So that's essentially all we need to think about. If you think about the 4-paragraph structure, so we need 2 details paragraphs. So there's different ways you can do this, but we want to make comparisons. This is one of those questions where making comparisons is definitely relevant. One way you could divide is 1 paragraph about the first map and the 2nd paragraph about the 2nd map. If you do that, it's going to be confusing, most likely, because your first paragraph is going to be very short. It's not going to say much. Or if you go into great detail about, in the northeast of the island, there are some palm trees. To the west of the island, there is a beach. It's going to be longer, but then your report's going to be quite long because you also need to describe all of the information in the 2nd map. So that's kind of difficult. Also, if you describe it's an uninhabited island, then when you get to the 2nd details paragraph, you're basically going to have to refer to different parts of the island that you mentioned in the first paragraph. And again, that's redundant. So that's confusing. Really, the best thing to do is kind of focus on some other aspect, some other way that you can divide the picture. So, we could talk about the eastern side of the island and the western side of the island. We could talk about the northern half of the island and the southern half of the island. It doesn't really matter. In some maps, it will be really obvious where you do this, and in others, there'll be more choice. So in some maps, you might have a main road running through the middle of the picture, and that's the most logical way to talk about north of the main road and south of the main road. For this one, again, we could talk about one side, north side, south side, east side, west side, something so that we can say on the eastern side of the island, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 accommodation units were built in a circular pattern connected by a footpath, something like that. So that tells us what was there, what's there now, gives us the details. And so let's say we divide the island at, west of that and east of that. So the far eastern side of the island remains untouched and is largely composed of palm trees. Something like that. Now, the other paragraph is going to be about all these other differences, the adding of the restaurant, the vehicle track, the accommodation units on the western side of the island, the swimming area, the pier. One thing that you do have to remember is you have to mention all of the changes. So think of a change like a category. That's going to cause you problems if you miss one. So in this one, everything. You've got to put everything in. And that's the same for maps question. Any change that appears, you need to include in your report. So that's it, basically summarizing from the type of place it was to the type of place it is, and coming up with some way to divide the map so that we can report the changes logically, clearly, in a way that's easy to follow and easy to understand. If you do that, you should be fine for every type of map question. And what we're going to do now is look at a specific one in more detail. Okay, so let's have a look at the specific response, the specific sample answer on the website. So again, there's information here about various aspects of the task. Here is the question. So if you haven't seen this question before, think about how you would answer it. The plans below show the layout of a university's sports center now and how it will look after redevelopment. So the first bit is current, and then the future redevelopment. So think about how would you describe, the difference between the center now and in the future. So it's what kind of place and will become what kind of place. That's essentially what you do in an overview for a maps question. And also think about, how would you divide the details paragraphs? So would you talk about one in one and one in the other? Probably not, but how would you divide this new sports center up so that you could talk about it logically and clearly? Normally, as I mentioned, I would simply talk about one part in one details paragraph and one part in the others, or perhaps east or west. For this one, because of the way the changes occurred and what types of changes occurred, I went with a slightly different way. Again, as long as you choose a logical way that's easy to follow, there's no requirement as to how you divide the information. So let's just have a look. The plans show the current design of a university sports complex and changes that will occur during the redeveloping of the area. Okay, so again, if you look at the question, that's essentially just paraphrased, said it in a slightly different way, but that's the information that you need to introduce what you're going to talk about. Overview, overall, the center will undergo major additions both in terms of the center's structure and the number of amenities available. So I looked at this. So there's lots of new stuff planned to be added, but also structurally speaking, currently it's one building with outdoor courts to the east and the west of that building. And in the future, we're going to have a single structure, a single building, and inside that building, some of the things will be the same and some of the things will be different. So essentially, a very broad general way to describe that: major additions to the structure and the number of amenities or facilities available. Now, the way that I decided to think about this was to describe kind of the current building and changes to that, and then the new additions to that building. So in the place where the outdoor courts are currently, what's going to happen in the future with those places, and how does the future overall structure differ because of that. So first I'm going to talk about this area in the center with the gym, changing room, pool, seating, and reception. So that's the current place. And then the other paragraph, I'm going to talk about the building addition, which will go to the east and to the west. So entering the new center, the reception, and the changing room and seating areas enclosing the 25-meter pool in the center of the current facility will remain unchanged. So again, if we look at this, reception, the pool, the changing room, and the seating area, those things stay the same. I'll get to the gym later. A sports shop and a cafe, however, are to be added to the left and right of the entrance in the reception area. So there we have the sports shop and the cafe, and I've pretty much described most of that area, with the exception of the gym, again, which I'll get to later. Now, I've said left and right, not west and east. That's very clear. If I say the entrance to the left and right of the entrance, the arrow here makes it clear that the entrance, that's the entrance. You could also say to the east and west, or the west and east. But okay, now I'm going to describe in more detail. So now the second details paragraph is longer because it describes this area, where the leisure pool is and where the sports hall is, and there's lots of changes that have happened to these areas. So the outdoor pools to the east and west of the current facility are to be demolished to make way for the building expansion. So there, I've explained, going from this one on the top to this one on the bottom of the picture. In the northwest corner of the new facility, a large leisure pool will be added, and in the northeast corner, the size of the present gym will approximately double. In place of the current outdoor court there, a new sports hall is planned, as well as 2 new dance studios to the east of the new hall. Finally, additional changing rooms will be built in the re-envisioned building's southeast and southwest corners. So if we look, have I described all of the changes like I need to? Yes, we've got the leisure pool, the changing room, sports shop, reception, 25-meter pool, seating, the gym, the dance studios, the changing rooms, the cafe, everything is there. So I've described all of the changes. Not too long, 187 words, so that's pretty good to get that much description in such a short space and to include everything. And really the only other thing I have to say about this is in the current University Sports Center, and referring to the entrance left, right, that's very clear. You'll notice when I described this the new building, the single structure, just saying, keeping with left and right, first of all, they've given me the compass points, so that's not necessary. But also, it would get complicated, above, below, left, right. The compass points are there to make it easy for you to keep everything clear. So if I'm talking about the pools east and west of the facility, the northwest corner of the new facility, the northeast corner of the new facility, again, I'm being clear about the location. So there's a lot of different things happening here, and so that's why I've gone from left, right, above, below to using the compass points. That's generally what you will do when you get a maps question, because it makes it much more clear. So if you have a look, like with the other questions, you'll see cohesive devices, referencing devices, and less common and useful vocabulary highlighted, and that should help you understand how vocabulary and coherence and cohesion works in this particular example. Again, when you get feedback on any question that you write, on any report or essay that you write, you should be getting feedback on all of these things, in addition to grammar, structure, things like that. But use of vocabulary in terms of the words and phrases that you use, and also your use of cohesive devices and referencing devices are things which are really important, because examiners are looking for them. So there's a lesson on maps and the important things you need to keep in mind when practicing these types of questions. As there are a couple of different varieties, maps in the past, maps in the future, you could have to talk about buildings like I did in this question, or outdoor areas like the island question, or areas of a city. So there are some different questions. So have a look at the available official materials out there and make sure that you know what to do in each situation. In particular, the skill that people need to practice the most for this particular type of question would be the differences in the overview, again, explaining what kind of place it was and what kind of place it is now, or what kind of place it is and what kind of place it will become. That's your overview. And how to logically divide the maps up so that you can clearly describe them and detail all of the changes that happen from one map to the next. As long as you do that, do adequate practice so you can keep everything within 20 minutes at the score you need. Do that before you register for the test. And when exam day comes, maps questions won't give you any trouble at all.